Hi, thanks so much for being a part of the Apologist Bookshelf. Gary Zacharias here. I was in the middle of a chapter in the last podcast from a book called Why God Makes Sense in a World That Doesn't. Gavin Ortlund is the author. And we looked at a chapter that was dealing with things that are in this world that are kind of hard to explain if there is no God. And so he talked about the argument from math, the fact that math is permanent, it's durable, it has elegance, it's got beauty, it's applicable to things in this world, it's extremely useful. So he says, I think you can make a pretty good case for the existence of some kind of transcendent world out there, because math seems to just be separate from this physical world itself. So we covered that. He also had the argument from music. He asked the reader to take a look at and listen to Hans Zimmer's work on YouTube. It's called Chevaliers de Sangreal, Chevaliers, Chevaliers, de, D-E, and then Sangreal. I would really encourage you to do that. It is beautiful. He also mentioned another one that I haven't looked at yet and listened to, Tommaso Albinoni's work called Adagio in G minor. So it's kind of funny. I think it's really clever. He said, before you read this section, listen to it. He said, really listen without doing anything else. And he said, do the same. He said, you done? Okay, now read on. So he says, we've got the argument from music. Music seems to stir our souls and seems to have some kind of power that reveals at least the possibility of some transcendent ethereal world out there beyond the world of the material world that we live in today. Okay, so here's the third thing that he's going to cover in this chapter. He subtitles it Stronger Than Death, the Argument from Love. And I like it because he's very personal in here. He said, I've got a confession to make. I love the music from Frozen 2. He says, I have a 5-year-old daughter, so at least I have a good excuse. He says, I'm not telling you how many times I've seen it. But he said, there's a song there called Do the Next Right Thing. And that's sung by Anna, and her friend Olaf, that lovable snowman, is dying in her arms. So I hope I'm not giving away too much here. But as he's lying there dying, Anna and Olaf have a conversation. Olaf says, hey, Anna, I just thought of one thing that's permanent. She said, what's that? And he says, love. Then they hug, and she said, I love you, and he melts away. And he said, that's such a common sentiment. We hear things like love never dies, love is forever. He says it's so common in movies and literature. It's one of the great themes in songs, too. But he said, if you really think about it, the idea that love is permanent, is that a true idea? And he tells a story next. Paul Kalanithi, he was a brilliant neurosurgeon. He had degrees from Stanford and Cambridge and Yale, had this great future ahead of him. But in his last year of residency at Stanford, he began to have health difficulties. And he got diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and he passed away in 2015. Now, he wrote a book called When Breath Becomes Air. And so he described this whole experience of finding out about this illness and his journey to faith through it all. And he said when he was young, he was raised in a devout Christian family. They prayed, they had scripture readings. But he said, he would love science, and he began believing in the possibility of just a material world, right? That's all there is, just what's around us. And that would take care of everything and get rid of ideas like souls and God and bearded white men in robes, he says. So he spent a lot of time in his 20s trying to build a frame for this endeavor. But he came back to faith. And toward the end of his life, he said, the problem became evident. To make science the arbiter of metaphysics is to banish not only God from the world, but love, hate, meaning, to consider a world that's self-evidently not the world we live in. That's not to say that if you believe in meaning, you must also believe in God. He says it's to say, though, that if you believe that science provides no basis for God, you're almost obligated to conclude that science provides no basis for meaning, and therefore life itself doesn't have any. So that's what Kalanithi said as he was facing death. So the author here for this book, Ortlund, says, well, let's think about it. If you have a naturalistic account of reality, the world is all there is, just everything's just matter and motion, He said, then the feeling of love is kind of like what he talked about in my last podcast that I did about the enjoyment of music. Love just came about as sort of a byproduct of natural selection. It helps our ancestors survive and pass on their genes. It's just an accidental feature of reality. And so the feeling that it's significant, that's just your brain tricking you. So Olaf saying that love is permanent, that's only in a kind of a poetic, limited sense, if at all. Now, he said he's not suggesting that naturalism doesn't have any possible explanation. There are evolutionary explanations for why love came about, but he says that's all they are, explanations. So he quotes from Edward O. Wilson's classic text on sociobiology. And he says in that book, how can altruism, which by definition reduces personal fitness, possibly evolve by natural selection? So in other words, for the naturalist, love is a problem. You got to account for it because it doesn't seem to fit in with biological life, which is ruthlessly selfish out there. Got to pass on your genes and to heck with everybody else. So he says a lot of expressions of love that you encounter among people who are naturalists they end up giving you kind of irrational expressions of love. So he uses Richard Dawkins as an example. Dawkins thinks polyamory, several people being together in a sexual relationship. He said that's more rational than this fanatically monogamous devotion to which we are susceptible. That's Dawkins speaking. And he said, it's probably true religion is a byproduct of these irrational mechanisms, and that causes us to fall in love. But then the author Ortlund says, yeah, but by contrast, in a theistic worldview, especially if you think about the Trinity, that's the Christian view of the Godhead, God the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. He said, you look at the Trinity, he said, love is the core of reality. It's eternally shared among those three members of the Godhead. The Bible even says in 1 John, God is love. And so if that's the case, then there's every reason to affirm the idea that love is permanent in a literal sense. So Ortlund then has just a little graph here of summing up the differences between these two options. So if you're a naturalist or you're a theist, especially a Trinitarian theist, what's the difference? Well, love in naturalism is accidental. I mean, it could be that it would never exist. It's just an accident. But love with the Christian Trinity, it's essential. That's the core of reality. It's flowing between the Father, Son, and the Spirit. Let's go back to love and naturalism. It's biological. It didn't exist before animals, and it won't exist after them. But what is the Trinitarian theistic viewpoint? It's not biological, it's spiritual. Prior to the biological world, even before the physical world, it was there. It was the very motive behind the existence of the world. What does naturalism say regarding love's function? It's a survival mechanism. It doesn't have any other deep or abiding significance. But what's the Trinitarian view, the theistic view? The purpose, it's the cause, and it's the ultimate destination of the world. So he said it's huge difference between the naturalistic and the theistic worldview when it comes to love. One author said you can compare love and death in each view. There's a divide, this is Jerry Walls now speaking, there's a divide of radical proportions between those who believe love is stronger than death and those who believe death is stronger than love. That's interesting. He said, basically, now I'm back to the author Ortlund here, he said it feels like it's a matter of despair versus infinite relief. And he says, okay, but people are going to say, oh, are things really that bad in a naturalistic view? Why does love need to be something big and eternal? So what if it doesn't exist forever? Right now, I can still love, and I can be loved, and I can enjoy the experience. And Ortlund admits, he says, sure, you don't need to believe in an eternal love to experience love in the here and now. But he said, what we ultimately believe about love affects our experience of it here in the here and now. And he goes to C.S. Lewis. He said, if you're a materialist, that's all you believe in, the universe. He said, you can't really, except in the lowest animal sense, be in love with the girl if you know, and you keep remembering that all those beauties of her person and her character are just a momentary and accidental pattern produced by a collision of atoms, and that your own response to them is just some kind of psychic phosphorescence coming from the behavior of your genes. Now, that's C.S. Lewis talking. He says the same thing when it comes to music. You can't get on very serious pleasure from music if you know and remember it's just an illusion as far as it being significant. It's just your nervous system irrationally conditioned to it. So I think that's really a good point. So Lewis is saying, again, if you really buy into materialism, how could you enjoy being with a person that you quote-unquote love when you know it's an accident and it's just a pattern produced by a bunch of atoms smacking into each other? He said, when you love somebody, it is like a transcendent experience. So this is Ortlund talking now. He says that's true of romantic love, but it's also for friendship love. He said somehow love feels like you're getting caught up into something transcendent, something that's really good, and he capitalizes G, good, and it's nourishing with a capital N. He said that's pretty bitter if you have to interpret these feelings as just being illusions. So he said if a world is entirely driven by natural selection, right? Materialism is it, then death is stronger than love. All you have to do is wait, and love will cease to exist. And so will every consequence or every memory of love. It's just an accidental glitch in the program that gets worked out. And then he goes to the atheist Bertrand Russell to describe what this world looks like if there's no supernatural. Now remember, he's an atheist. No purpose, no meaning. And so Russell says about the only option you have is a unyielding despair. Now this is a good-sized paragraph, but honestly it's worth reading for the view. This is to me, it's a very realistic, fair, honest view put forward by an atheist, in this case Bertrand Russell, of what the world signifies, what it means to somebody without a belief in the supernatural. So he said, amid such a world, if anywhere, our ideals henceforward must find a home. That man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving, that his origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms, that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave, that all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. Russell goes on to say, all these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. And then here's his final sentence. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can a soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. Is that sad? I mean, how could you get up every day and face that and say that's what you believe about things? And back to Ortlund, he says that worldview is pretty grim. He said, way down deep, we both sense and we hope that there's something more to it all than this. He said that's why we tell stories like Beauty and the Beast and others in which love somehow overcomes death. He said maybe these stories are a clue about what the ultimate story is like, and he capitalizes that. So he then backs off. He's finished talking about math and music and love, and he said he's really trying to make a larger point in this chapter. He says better sense can be made of human experience if there's some ultimate meaning that undergirds our world. So he said think about the human qualities like consciousness and rationality and free will. He said, where are these coming from? He said, many of these characteristics, like including our self-awareness, our ability to reason, to make choices, he said, they work more organically in a supernaturalistic worldview of some kind. He said, again, if you go back to naturalism, the materialistic view, then everything about our experience is a result of purposeless, key word there, purposeless physical processes that came before us. And so all the aspects of human psychology just come down to evolutionary explanations. So he said, if you have that worldview, it's hard to avoid a conclusion that the idea of meaning is out there. It has no transcendent reference. It's illusory. And he said, that's devastating to people. He says it cuts into the essence of our humanity. He mentions Leo Tolstoy. He really did consider suicide. And he was asking this question. So here's Tolstoy's question. Is there any meaning in my life that the inevitable death awaiting me does not destroy? Good question, huh? Just think about that for a minute. Is there any meaning in my life that death that's coming for me doesn't destroy? I mean, you build up your business, you have friendships, you accomplish things in your leisure time, you have a family. All of that goes away if you die. All of it goes away when they die, if the material world is all there is. He mentions then Albert Camus. He wrote The Myth of Sisyphus, and he describes the absurdity of life. He says we want meaning, but we're in a meaningless world. We want happiness, but everything's going to die because of death. We want coherence, we want unity, but there's chaos and disintegration. And so he compares, this is Camus now, he compares our situation with the character Sisyphus in Greek mythology. Boy, is this a grim story. But Camus is going to try to turn it around, make it more positive. So here's the story. Sisyphus was bound to eternally roll a stone up a hill only to watch it come back down. Boom, 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 boom. And then push it back up again and have it come down. But Camus doesn't think of that as meaningless and leading us to consider suicide. He said, no, Sisyphus' task is enough to occupy his energies and that'll satisfy his heart. He said that's his world. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. That's what Camus says. Well, Ortlund says, really? He says it's hard to accept such a worldview without a feeling of real loss and devastation. He said, if as absurdism is right, most of us will begrudgingly give into it instead of like it, like Camus suggests. He said, but what if there's an alternative that allows us to retain a transcendent meaning? And that we're made in God's image, right? That'll help, won't it? So such a view can offer a compelling account of why love feels the way it does, why our choices really feel meaningful, and why our reasoning can be geared toward truth and not just survival. So he said, we get an elegant vision of humanity this way. We're not an accidental offshoot of physical processes. What are we? We're the thing in all the universe that most closely mirrors its creator. So what is he saying? Theism allows us to live within our humanity comfortably. He says we don't have to distrust these deep intuitions that we have of love, of reason, of beauty. He said we can relax into them. He said that feeling that this world and our place within it means something is not deceiving to us. We're not, quote, accidental collocations of atoms, like Russell says. We're characters in the middle of the greatest story ever told. He said we're not like Camus suggested, that we're like Sisyphus rolling a boulder up a hill and letting it fall back. We're progressing dramatically toward the final chapter. And then he winds up, right? So now we're in the last part. He calls it his conclusion to this chapter. He said, our world seems to derive its being from a meaning, right? So it's like a story, meaning from the author. He said, we discover around us truths like math. We discover beauty like music. Both those things seem out of place if we're in a strictly naturalistic conception of reality. And most of us believe there is such a thing as love, and we believe, like rationality, that it exists. He said that's awfully difficult to come up with if you have boundaries of pure naturalism. Where do these metaphysical qualities come from? He said better sense can be made out of our world and the experiences we have if we believe it's ordered or structured by something beyond itself. So then he asks the question, well, what kind of entity might be responsible for giving this world transcendent meaning? Now he says we can't say yet. Okay, well, he will later on in the book. This is roughly in the middle of the book. Now he'll come to the God of the Bible and he'll come to Jesus later. But he said, we can't say yet, but he said, think about the features of this world that give impression of intelligence and beauty. And so he said, if we try to figure out what might be behind this world, what might be transcendent, that explains everything, he said, it sounds like something personal. So he said, the source of this world seems to be the kind of thing that can produce equations, it can produce sonatas. He said, it seems like something personal rather than raw, impersonal power. He said, think about the universe. It includes us. We reason, we love, we feel, we imagine, we create, we dream, we want meaning and happiness. He said, it's strange to think that the effect would be greater than the cause, that the personal should come from the impersonal, or that the universe, devoid of meaning, would produce creatures who can't live without it. which I think is a really good argument there for the existence of God. So that's the way he's going to end this chapter. And I hope you get a good feel for what the book is doing. Powerful book called Why God Makes Sense in a World That Doesn't. And I hope that's helpful to you. I think it's a powerful argument, especially arguments that you don't normally hear. You hear argument from science and design, the start of the universe, and things like that. But he was arguing for the existence of math, the existence of love. And so I think that's powerful. Beauty. Where does beauty come from? So these are things that we can talk about with other people. Well, thanks for being a part of the podcast today. Hope you enjoyed it. Drop me a note if you're curious about something, and we'll do another podcast soon. Thanks for listening.